car to the shop. And the mechanic says, your tires are bald. It's really not safe to drive this way. So I'll tell you what, you bring your car in once a month. Each time I'll change one tire. And in a few months, you'll be good to go.
What kind of mechanic is that?
Crazy, right?
They used to lose their job immediately.
Right. And yet, that's what therapists do. Right? We say, wow, you've got a real problem here that's interfering with your functioning. So I'll tell you what, you come in for 45, 50 minutes a week, and in a couple months or a couple years, you'll be good to go. Crazy, right?
Well, no. Because
That was right there.
I feel like those two aren't comparable.
Well,
Because-
that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah,
Agreed.
because a car is is nowhere near as
Not as
complex as
sentient
human
being.
emotion.
Right.
Like, you take a car in and you know, blah, 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 tires are done, there's nothing to, like, it's not like the car is traumatized by its tire removal and replacement.
Right.
You know, like, there's no memory of that.
Okay.
So like, there's no, but, you know, human beings have a memory
Okay.
and hold on to things.
Okay. But what if we could bring a human being in and just do the job instead of chopping it up into little
That's
pieces?
not a human being.
I don't think I want to do that. That seems like something a little violent, you know,
Well-
somewhere.
Like, that seems like it takes out what makes humans such a,
Okay.
like, unique
Okay,
special
so-
species.
So, let me tell you what I'm hearing. First of all, I love Hampshire. Because people think for themselves and they speak up. I'm also hearing assumptions. And I want to encourage you to have an open mind and listen to my story, and then we'll argue about it.
Okay.
So, why do we do therapy in the hour per week model, which is conventional? First of all, because that's the way we've always done it. Secondly, because it works. And that there is some value to incremental work, where you have some discussion, some experience, and then that stews. And the client plays with it and tries things in their life and then comes back for the next step. So it's not wrong. You know, and the reasons you're defending it are good reasons. Another reason we do it that way is because insurance companies will pay for it, and those of us who have to make a living need to get paid. However, there's nothing about memory reconsolidation that requires being chopped up into little pieces. And when the core of a client's problem is the stuff behind the wall, or when a core of a client's problem is the stuff behind the wall, even if that's not the whole thing, but when a significant piece of it is there, there's no special reason to chop that up into little pieces. If you ask 100 people, would you like to get the beneficial results of your treatment next week or next year? About 100 of them will say, next week I want to be done with my suffering and move on with my life.
I think it depends on what it is you're getting the results for.
And then I would have asked what
Yeah.
specific types of
Well,
results and how.
for example, do you want to be done with your post-traumatic stress disorder next week or next year? Do you want to be done with your depression next week or next year?
Well, I'd rather it take a year, but gain a lot of self-knowledge and self-growth, and have that year to, like, work
Figure
with it
out.
and understand it and understand myself, and then by the end of that year, finally say, I, you know, fully understand myself, I'm fully settled with this, and then, you know, be at peace with it when it's done, rather than like, oh, I'm suffering but I'll be done next week, so whatever. And then just like.
Okay, so
suffer
you're
through.
imagining that you wouldn't get that result in a week?
Oh, no,
Of
yeah.
having worked through it and being
Yeah,
at peace
I
and all
mean, you
that. Okay,
couldn't.
so you're wrong.
I don't see how either, and I
Okay.
disagree.
Okay, but I've been doing it for years. We have research. We have
Yes.
experience. And we have client reports.
But
I
that's
think
it.
that there is something interesting to open up with, like, I don't know, well, I mean, you have to remember that, like, time is also constructed, so.
Yeah.
Time
Anyway,
and healing.
let me explain it first, and then, all right, just, so let me get through my spiel, and then you can object. Yeah. Most people who are suffering prefer to get through the suffering and get to the next part of their life. And there may be some people who prefer to take it slower, and that's okay too. Sometimes it's very costly to have a problem. We get people who just dropped out of college. Right, that's the one we were talking about today,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mhm.
Who had something happen and she left college right in the middle of the term. It's very costly to have some problems. People lose their families, people lose their freedom. When somebody comes in for full consecutive days of therapy, your dropout rate gets cut way down. Because, if therapy's gonna take 6 months or a year, people can go to jail, they can get pregnant, they can move to Florida, they can get partway better, and then they don't feel the urgency to finish the job. A lot of things can go wrong where they don't really complete the treatment. Your dropout rates, when somebody comes in and says, this is what I'm doing this week, your dropout rates are very low. When you're doing trauma work in particular, even with a good method like EMDR or PC, if you're doing it in that hour per week model, you open up a memory, maybe you get partway through it, and then you try to kind of put it away again, so when the client leaves your session, they're okay. And that might work, but it might not work. And we get a lot of refugees, even from good trauma therapists, because people have said, yeah, I did the EMDR, it was really good, but then I'd be all messed up all week in between sessions. When you do it intensively, you open up a memory, you keep on working till you finish it. Then you open up the next one, you work till you finish it. So there's less risk for destabilization, for clients getting messed up between sessions. There's still some risk. We still have clients who, they work for a few days or a couple of weeks, and that's a lot of work in a short time, so there's some risk of destabilization there. But I think overall, it's less risk. Yeah.
I think what bothers me is the standardization of therapy. Like, you have a manual and you tell the therapist what to do, and if you do this and do that, the patient will get better and be functional again and get done with their problem. It seems to me like there is too much authority granted to this procedure and the efficiency of the therapy, and it seems to me like a problem-solving procedure that's not really getting into like how the clients are thinking, or
Okay.
how
So
they
what I'd
how
like
they
to
tell
do is,
their
I'd like to
clients are.
come back to this at the end, because it's sort of a different topic.
Yeah.
So don't forget it.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Another advantage of intensive therapy is that you use about half of the total hours of treatment. Because a lot of therapy is hello and goodbye. Right, every session, there's the check-in, there's the crisis of the week, there's et cetera, then there's whatever, and then there's the putting the client away again. It takes about a quarter to a third of each session. When you do intensive therapy, it's kind of like binge watching a season of a TV show. There's no ads, there's no recaps, it's just all progress. Also, in weekly therapy, a lot of the work is with coping skills, which you better do, because you don't want your client to deteriorate while they're waiting for their healing to happen. But trauma healing is more stabilizing than so-called stabilization intervention. Because what's destabilizing is that the client's traumatized. So you're cutting out a lot of the coping skills, you're cutting out a lot of the hello and goodbye. And so you probably use about 50% of the total sessions for intensive therapy than you would for the same results otherwise. So very briefly, we have a staff of about 7 nurse, so therapists. We've been doing only intensive therapy for quite a few years. We collect data on it. Our clients routinely send me emails. I get an email every week or two with some clients saying about how good their life is now and how they never thought they would be this way and da-da-da-da. And now and then that something's left unfinished and there's still more work to do. That happens too. But what we're finding in terms of our data is that we're getting about the same results as we would if we had done the same thing for the hour per week. In other words, healing is healing, etc. Does everything get done intensively? Probably not. Some clients do not do any therapy afterwards. Some continue with a weekly therapist afterwards. It's really case by case. So that's what I came to say. And so first, now I cut you off before, so if you want to add, and then we'll go to what you said.
I mean, I agree a lot with what you're saying, that a lot of this seems procedural, and there's a lot of how you're speaking about it makes it feel like an assembly line,
Okay.
almost. And, you know, I think that, you know, not only does the type of therapy that works for each person, you know, not only does the type of therapy differ, but the way that, you know, you have to approach a person, the way, like, so much of therapy is individualized to the person receiving therapy. I hate the word client because that just feels dumb, because, like, I don't know, because, you know, finding a therapist, there's a connection. You're sharing a lot of your life with them, and then to kind of think like, well, they're my doctor, and, you know, like, they're quote unquote forced to listen to me because I'm paying them, like, I don't know. But, you know, like you said, your practice only uses intensive therapy, but yeah, like, I don't know words, but I agree a lot with what you're saying of, like, it just seems so procedural, and, like, all the different types of therapy are interesting, and, you know, studies are interesting and cool, but I feel like the people are getting lost in the data, at least in this
Okay.
scenario.
Okay, let me respond. So first of all, we don't accept everybody. If somebody has a couples issue, we'll send somebody who does couples work, right? If somebody needs medicine, we'll send somebody who does medicine. So I wouldn't claim that intensive therapy is the only treatment model that's worthy. That being said, I also would not assert that different people necessarily require different treatment models. I think that's an assumption that has to be tested. And given that trauma is a driving force behind most presenter problems, I think it's pretty legitimate to use a trauma-informed approach as a generic approach, and the research bears that out. That doesn't mean I'm right. I think the assumption that we should have 30 different treatment approaches so that we can match them to people, that's never actually been validated.
I don't mean to say that we should have like 30 different types for all these different types of people, but I think, I mean, having, you know, a core, you know, few types of therapy makes some sense, but they also need to be malleable enough to
Okay.
individualize.
So let me go to that. There's a literature on psychotherapy training, And that literature is that you start out, it's very important to have manualized, even scripted psychotherapy so that the therapist develops a skill set and gets good at something. But that's not the end point. Then it's very important to have practice and ongoing supervision so that the therapist learns to take that skill set and to individualize it to a given client. And I think if you talk to our clients, and I don't think we're unique in this way, they don't feel that they're in an assembly line, even though we do have a manualized treatment approach. Because, we start out by getting to know the client and asking them a lot of questions and learning about them and building a relationship. The motivational work is what do you care about, what are you here for, what do you want, let's figure out how you can get what you came for. So the fact that you have a systematic approach doesn't mean that you don't have a human connection with the people you're working with. You can do both, and you have to do both. But that's also, that if you're only using a manual, it's not gonna work. It's a stage in development. Other questions, comments, complaints? Yeah.
I guess just building on what Rylan was saying is, you just said that you are valuing the human connection,
Absolutely.
right? Would you say that?
You can't, nobody's gonna work with you if they don't feel connected.
Yeah. So that you're not just doing it for the data, you're doing it because you have like some compassion for the other person too.
You mean me personally?
I guess.
Okay. I'm doing it because I want hurt people to get what they need. And that means I want my client to get what they need. And I want some kid in Afghanistan to get what they need too. So, so personally, I'm trying to do good work and I'm trying to gather data to develop the standard of care. So it's all the levels, and I don't think one has to compete with another.
But what about like compassion for the other person who you're working with?
I'm not following you.
Like, I don't know, are you working that into your model, like?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
You can't not. I mean, if you're just doing a procedure with somebody, they're not gonna work with you. And now you have to care about your clients or nothing happens. Yep.
Actually, to build off Dan's question, because I think my question was building in from that same angle, but I guess my version of that would be in your field data and accounted work that then gets submitted to the academy are the elements of compassion. How is it that you are accounting for that
Okay.
merging of
So,
naturalistic and
in our
compassionate
training
response?
program.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I
Okay.
did not appreciate being spoken of.
Sorry,
I wanted
go
to
ahead.
voice that. Thank you. But how are you accounting for the construction of the manualized processes that you're seeking to develop and to put into the field, and then also operating on an individualistic and compassion-based approach? Is that coming out also in the outcome of your work that's gonna go into this field?
In our training program, we teach that. We have specific training modules on therapeutic relationship and on self-care and et cetera. In our papers, we refer to the books, which also include that, but that's not the focus of the paper. The focus of the paper is the procedures and the results, the sort of standard study. So when we train our therapists, relationship is prominent. But when we publish the papers, it's not so prominent.
Okay, I suppose my continued question would, or my response and question that comes up for me in response would be possibly what then theoretically and procedurally is lost in that translation process from the field versus what you're actually in praxis doing.
Yes.
I just was, I'm also approaching from a critical psychology understanding and utilizing other like critical race, gender, and theoretical influences. And I was just wondering how in the discipline of psychotherapy practice and your specific work, you're seeking to merge that there. Like how would you be impacting that?
Yeah. I think it's generally recognized in the field that the relationship stuff is important. And so it's sort of assumed that whatever method you're using, you're doing the relationship stuff too. But it's not necessarily talked about when you're comparing AE and RLPC. So it's assumed and something might get left. Oh, yeah.
I just had a question. When you were talking about the slide on trauma resolution methods, you kept referring to them as like plans more than once, and it just kind of made me think about, I don't know, kind of like what Rylan was saying, like assembly line. It kind of made me think of like capitalism and like just doing things because it's like a brand and you're selling it for like a commercial purpose. So I was wondering why you would call it a brand.
Well, it's partly just a way of talking, but there is a certain amount of chauvinism in the field where there are people who really are champions for their brand as opposed to just being, you know, I've published on 5 different ones of these methods, and I've got 3 of them books featuring 3 different ones. So I'm not really, I feel like I'm not one of the chauvinists. But there is a lot of that around, and people are very, they really sort of advocate for their particular technique. So it kind of is like that. Not always, but there's some, yeah. But it's partly just also a way of talking.
Okay.
You talked about getting someone ready for treatment. I was just wondering what that looks like, or what sort of the standard of thinking that someone is ready for treatment or to go through with these sort of methods.
All right, and so there's more than one standard. The model we teach is, let me see, how do I say this? Introduction, sort of orientation to treatment, conditions, purpose, etc. Get to know you, rapport building, some sort of evaluation stuff, history and current functioning, motivational work, helping clients to identify their goals and helping them to become more committed to their goals so they're willing to do the work to get what they want. Case formulation, in other words, explaining to the client what's going on with them, how we understand it, and treatment planning. Based on that understanding, what are we going to do together to help them get to their goals? And what can they do in other ways to help them get to their goals? In the weekly model, we would then do stabilization and coping skills. Whereas in the intensive model, you save that for later. There may be attachment work if the client is less than securely attached. Then we go through the trauma resolution work. And then another round of stabilization and coping skills. So, in other words, now that you're not being driven by the sore spot reaction anymore, are you where you want to be, or is there still something in the way? Do you still have life situations or habits or whatever? And so let's work on those again now that the sore spot stuff's not driving you. And finally, anticipating future challenges. you're doing fine now, but what might be coming up next month or next year, and let's prepare for that. You got something before?
Oh, I did it. I'm trying to remember. I forgot.
So I'm just kind of interested by, on the last slide, the phrase, the healing is done, which just kind of interests me as a concept that like healing is ever comes to an end point, because to me it reads like there is such a thing as the extinguishment of grief. So I don't know if you could just like speak to that philosophically or practically. And I think that comes up a little bit in terms of like reevaluating
Okay.
stabilization and whatnot, but.
Whenever you see me wait, that means it's a good question. That takes some thought. A lot of good questions here. All right. So, certain methods are quite elegant in terms of figuring out when you're actually done. So EMDR and PC both have systems where you check in with the client, where are you on 0 to 10, how bad's the feeling. And if it's not a 0, it means that there's something that's still sticking, that still needs to be digested, and they do it, right? You hang in there. And then with EMDR, how true is that positive belief that you wanted to feel? And if that's not there, then there's something else in the way, and you can work on that. With EMDR, you also now check your body, concentrate on the memory, and check your body. Is there any sticking in there? And then the follow-up. So, what have you noticed? How are you feeling about the memory now? And what we find is that, for the most part, you can actually get all the way done. And there are some exceptions, and the main exception would be sometimes with grief, that people need to live through it. And maybe we'll get from 10 to 4. Well, more likely we'll get from 10 to 0, and the next week it's a 4. Because there's just more there. It's like sweeping dust, that you swept the whole thing and it's all in your dustpan, you can throw it out, but there's all this stuff swirling in the air, and so the next day you come back and there's more dust on the floor. So grief sometimes is like that, and sometimes not.
Yes, I remembered my question. It was anecdotal and not actually related to this conversation. I was wondering your zodiac sign.
You were wondering what?
Your zodiac sign.
Sag.
Oh.
Does that mean something?
Yes.
It always does
Yes,
in
one.
Hampshire.
So I went to Hampshire class where querying about science has been happening, never happened in 13 years.
Okay.
Somebody had this group.
Supposedly triple fire, whatever that means.
The triple fire?
Yeah. I don't
Is
know
your
if that means-
moon and rising also fire sign?
I don't know, somebody just told me it's triple fire, I don't know what it means.
Were you born at the end of November?
No, December 10th. But doesn't it matter what year it was?
Yes, it does.
There you go.
But if someone told you that you're triple fire, it insinuates that your moon and your rising are also fire.
That makes
To
sense.
Hampshire.
It's not just a Hampshire thing. I actually know about astrology before I got here. I learned it from my
Yeah.
grandmother.
No, it's an amazing thing to know, trust me. But it's like more accepted here, and everyone else is like, what are you talking about?
Any other questions for Dr. Meanwhile?
I swear to God.
What?
It's snowing.
Oh, it is snowing.
What?
Oh, you're right, yeah.
The assumptions in the field that you're presenting your work on here. I was wondering, like, I'm gonna think of my question and ask you later.
Like assumptions about human beings and how you can treat them?
Assumptions on assumptions generally accepted within the field, like the assumption that within the field there is an assumption of compassion and connection within procedural practice. Like what dangers or risks that possibly poses, just because I know that there have been critical interventions to offer that aren't not those operating assumptions within the field. And so I was just wondering if you're presenting work and research and it's like,
So, I have to make sure I'm not interrupting.
thank you.
Thank you for saying it before. So the first thing I want to say is assumptions are dangerous, right? I challenged some assumptions today, and I try to challenge my own too. And sometimes other people do it for me, which is fine. As a matter of fact, people assumed the MDR couldn't work until they found out it did. Now there's something new called the flash technique, and people assume that can't work until they found out it does. I didn't even talk about that today. But so a lot of what you're perceiving as assumptions, I guess I'm reporting on the state of the field. For example, there's a book called The Heart and Soul of Change. Is that what it's called?
Yep.
All right. And it reviews decades of research on the so-called common factors or non-specific factors in therapy, things like empathy, warmth, positive regard, etc. And it's pretty clear from that line of research that the relationship is important, the therapy alliance is important, etc. across treatment orientations. Is everybody just as good as everybody else at developing that relationship with a therapy client? Obviously not. Some people are better at it than others. And I've been to therapists where I felt like they were technicians and didn't care about me. It happens. Even so, it really is recognized, universally recognized in the field that the relationship is important. It's not always done well, but it is recognized. Questions, comments, complaints, yeah?
So do you think your work, which contributes to the field, is creating more technicians or more people who are compassionate?
I really wish this wasn't a hard question to answer. Like I really wish it was just we're getting compassionate people. I don't know.
Compassion only goes so far. If you have compassion without tools, some clients will get better, but a lot of them won't. If you have tools without compassion, a few clients will get better, but a lot of them won't. So you really need both. And
But if you have compassion, isn't that a tool?
yes, but it's not going to get the trauma healing done in most cases. It's not going to get the self-management skills done in most cases.
Just because somebody understands doesn't mean it's gonna go away.
It's like when you sit with your friends can have all the
Yeah.
compassion in the world for you, but like they aren't trained in ways to like help you work through that in a way that's gonna be necessary
Right.
to like fully healing.
Yeah, that totally.
But I see what
makes
you mean
sense.
as compassion
Yeah.
is like disregarding
if
this
you
being
have
this
the
other world
tools.
that's not a tool or
Yeah.
technique, but it is.
Right.
And some people will get better just from compassion. For example, I had a friend I'm going to cancel dinner with in a few minutes because of the snow. When we were in Hampshire, she was my healing monkey, if you're familiar with the Harlow's work, where I did some healing through having a good friendship, right? That can happen. But if you're compassionate and have the tools, then the sky's the limit. I was gonna say that most of my work is focused more on the tools, then I was thinking about the way our system works that actually facilitates many of the common factors as well. For example, the script that we use for therapists to explain to clients what's going on with them not only conveys positive regard to the client, but increases empathy from therapy to client. We've researched this. So probably my own work is more focused on the technique, but it involves some development of the compassion side as well. And it's not to say that compassion is not important. It's just in terms of my own personal contribution, it's probably more emphasis on technique. Nikki, what would you say about that? Nikki's a therapist.
I am.
She's been through my training. How would you say?
I think that
you
it's.
balance the technique versus relationship.
I think that it's interwoven. I think it's even though you're using. I'm not going to be recording you very well on this. Putting the camera down.